A little girl sat crying alone on the courthouse steps, until a billionaire stopped walking, and realized she was waiting for someone who would never come. A gray morning fog hung low over the city courthouse, softening the edges of buildings and muting the noise from the street. The courthouse steps were cold, and the stone felt rough beneath the small girl who sat there alone. Her name was Emma, and she was only 7, though the way she sat, with her arms wrapped tightly around herself and her chin lowered, made her look older, as if she had already learned too much about disappointment. Her orange sweater was slightly too big, sleeves slipping past her hands, as though it once belonged to someone else. Her jeans were worn at the knees, and her blonde hair, tied hurriedly into a ponytail that morning, was already falling loose in thin strands around her face. Her eyes, swollen and red from crying, stared at the courthouse doors that kept opening and closing in front of her. People came and went, lawyers, families, police officers, strangers speaking in quick voices. No one stopped. No one looked at her. She seemed like a forgotten shadow sitting on the steps. Inside the courthouse, her mother was facing the judge. Emma knew why. She knew more than most children her age ever should. Her grandmother had been sick, and medicine was expensive, and her mother had taken something that did not belong to her. Not because she wanted to, but because she thought it was the only way left. Emma remembered the nights when her mother held her in silence, thinking Emma had fallen asleep, though Emma could feel the trembling of her mother's hands. She remembered how her mother whispered apologies into her hair, as if already fearing what was coming. Her father had been there earlier, but only to sign away responsibility. He had told the court he wanted no part in the situation, that he couldn't be tied to people who brought trouble. Emma remembered looking up at him, waiting for him to look back. He did not. His gaze stayed on the papers. He signed them quickly, handed them back, and left without a word. Emma had watched him walk away through the courthouse window, his figure getting smaller and smaller, and realized she no longer had a father. No relatives came. No neighbors. No one from her mother's workplace. No one from school. No one. At first, Emma had tried to be brave. She'd sat straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap, telling herself that someone would arrive, someone had to. But minutes had passed into an hour, and her breath had begun to break in sharp, unsteady pulls. She had finally covered her face with her hands, letting the tears fall quietly, because crying loudly felt like it would only make everything more real. She didn't know what would happen to her now. Children like her went into places she had heard other kids whisper about in fear. She imagined rooms with cold metal beds and adults who spoke with tired voices and didn't care whether she was scared at night. She wondered if she would be allowed to see her mother again. She wondered if anyone would even tell her what was happening. The fog around her lifted slightly as a black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He wore a dark coat over a navy suit, shoes polished, shoulders strong and straight. His brown hair was neatly styled, and when he looked toward the courthouse, his blue eyes were clear, sharp, observant. His name was Daniel Grayson, though Emma did not know that yet. To her, he was just another grown-up walking somewhere important. But when he saw her, something in his expression changed. He slowed. Most people looked away from sad things, from things that reminded them of pain, but he didn't. He walked toward her, stopping a few steps away so as not to startle her. He crouched, lowering himself to her height, his voice quiet and warm, not demanding anything from her. "Why are you sitting out here alone?" he asked. Emma felt her throat tighten. It took her a moment to speak, and when she did, her voice came out thin and small, almost breaking. "Because nobody came for me." Her words hung in the cold morning air, simple and devastating. Daniel felt them hit something deep inside him, something old, something he had spent years burying. He recognized the shape of loneliness when he saw it. He had seen it in the mirror once, a lifetime ago. And he knew, in that moment, that nothing about this day would be what he expected. Because life sometimes shifts on a whisper spoken by a child who believes no one is listening. Daniel didn't answer right away. He stayed crouched in front of Emma, giving her room to breathe, to decide whether she could trust him with even a little bit of her world. The courthouse doors continued to open and close behind them, footsteps echoing sharply across the stone steps. People walked past, glancing briefly but offering nothing, not a word of comfort, not a hand, not even a question. Emma had grown used to that kind of passing. But Daniel didn't look away. His gaze was steady, focused entirely on her, as if she were the only person in that wide, indifferent place. Emma wasn't used to being looked at like that. She shifted slightly, unsure whether to pull her hands away from her face or hide further behind them. She did neither. She simply sat, watching him with guarded eyes, like a small animal unsure if the approaching figure means safety or danger. Daniel noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled in the fabric of her sweater as if holding herself together. His voice, when he spoke again, was gentle. "I heard your mother's case was being held today," he said, not asking, but more as acknowledgement. "You're waiting for her, aren't you?" Emma nodded. A small, quick movement. Her bottom lip trembled as she tried to speak. "They won't let me in. They said I'm too little." She swallowed, the words sticking. "She's alone." Daniel's expression didn't flicker, but he felt something heavy settle in his chest. A courtroom was no place for a child. But neither were the cold front steps of a building where strangers watched without caring. He eased himself down to sit beside her on the step. Not crowding her. Not touching. Just sharing her space, making her solitude less absolute. Emma shifted again, surprised, but she didn't move away. A small sign of trust, or maybe just exhaustion. "Do you know why your mom is there?" Daniel asked, though his tone was not interrogating. It was the kind of question that gave a child the chance to name what they already understood, instead of being shielded from it. Emma's chin trembled. She nodded again, slower this time. "Grandma got sick. Real sick. The medicine was a lot, we didn't have enough." Her voice wavered, but she continued. "Mom tried to work more, she didn't sleep for days. Then she took a breath, sharp and uneven. She took money, from where she worked. They caught her." Daniel listened. He didn't frown, didn't sigh, didn't react with pity. He simply absorbed her words the way one receives truth, quietly and without judgment. It struck him how clearly Emma spoke, not with dramatic sadness, but with a kind of tired knowing that children should never have to carry. "And your father?" he asked softly. Emma's face tightened. She blinked, hard, as if protecting herself from the memory. "He said Mom was weak. And that I would turn out the same." Her voice cracked then, finally. "He didn't want us anymore." The sentence was simple, but it was sharp enough to carve through something inside Daniel. His jaw tightened, not at Emma, not at her mother, but at the idea of a man who could leave his child on courthouse steps like discarded luggage. Daniel looked forward, toward the heavy courthouse doors, and exhaled slowly. He remembered, all too vividly, a different courthouse, a different bench, and a small hand that had held his. He turned back to Emma. "You deserved better than that," he said. His voice was steady, but the quiet anger beneath it was unmistakable. "Your mother did too." Emma stared at him then, really stared, as if trying to understand what kind of adult said things like that. Her eyes were still wet, but her breathing slowed. Something in her expression shifted, just slightly, not hope yet, but the beginning of believing he meant what he said. They sat together for a while, listening to footsteps and city traffic and the faint rumble of buses. The morning fog had lifted completely now, replaced with pale sunlight that stretched across the concrete steps. After some time, Daniel spoke again. "I'm going inside soon," he said. "I came to speak in the hearing. To try to help your mother." Emma looked up sharply, surprise flickering across her face. Daniel gave a small, reassuring nod. "Not because I feel sorry for her, but because I know what it looks like when someone is trying to hold their family together with nothing but their hands." Emma listened, her eyes wide, her breath held trembling in her chest. She didn't say anything. But her hand, the small one curled into a fist in her sweater sleeve, slowly loosened. She whispered, barely audible, "Please don't let them take her away." Daniel did not promise. He did not offer empty comfort. He simply said, quietly and clearly, "I'm going to try." And for the first time that morning, Emma stopped crying. When the bailiff finally stepped into the hallway and called the next case, Emma flinched. The heavy wooden doors opened, and a few people filtered inside. Daniel rose slowly, as though careful not to disturb something fragile in the air around the child. Emma looked up at him with a mixture of fear and hope tangled together. She did not ask him to stay. She did not need to. He placed a steady hand on the railing to stand, then looked down at her. "Wait here," he said gently. "I'll come back for you." The way he said it, simple, sure, without hesitation, made something inside her still. Inside the courtroom, the air felt colder, tighter, filled with voices that were measured and official. Laura sat at the defendant's table, shoulders slumped, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Her blonde hair, once carefully styled every morning before work, now hung in loose strands around her face. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond lack of sleep, an exhaustion that came from weeks of fear layered on top of years of struggle. She kept glancing at the closed courtroom doors, searching for a small face she was not allowed to see. The prosecutor spoke first. He listed numbers, evidence, missing funds, policy breaches, his words sharp and precise like knives lined neatly in a row. The story he told was clean, cold, and simple: theft. He did not mention sick mothers or medication or the way desperation feels like drowning. He did not mention hands that shook with exhaustion from working double shifts. He did not mention love, because love rarely appears in official transcripts. Laura stared at the table, her expression blank, as if she had stopped expecting mercy. Then Daniel stood. His presence shifted the room immediately. Not because of his wealth, not because of his reputation, but because he did not look like someone here to defend an abstract case. He looked like someone who had already listened, really listened, to the story underneath the facts. The judge nodded for him to speak. Daniel's voice when it came was calm, steady, without theatricality. He spoke of families that break not because they are careless, but because the world gives them too much to carry. He spoke of LS work record, years of unbroken service, responsibility, quiet dedication. He spoke of the grandmother's failing health, the medical bills, the long nights that piled into longer weeks. He did not excuse the theft. He did not deny it. Instead, he placed it in context, a context the court had tried to ignore. He also pointed to a solution. He explained that his company was prepared to compensate the store, fully repay the loss, and provide Laura with employment suited to her skills. He offered housing help, a rehabilitation program, and oversight, not leniency, but structure. Not escape from consequences, but a chance to rebuild. There was silence when he finished. Not the dismissive silence of disbelief, but the kind that follows a truth spoken clearly. The judge's expression softened, not to sympathy, but to understanding. "There is a difference," the judge said slowly, "between a crime born from greed and a crime born from desperation." He looked down at Laura. "You do not deny what you did. And the court does not deny that you had reason to feel cornered." Lara's lips trembled. Her eyes filled, not with pleading, but with the quiet grief of someone who had already accepted the worst. "We will not send you to prison," the judge said at last. "You are sentenced to probation, counseling, and restitution. Under supervision. You will be required to maintain employment and remain under review for 12 months. For a moment, Lara didn't move. She seemed not to hear, as though her mind couldn't hold both fear and relief at once. Then she exhaled. A long, shaking breath that sounded like the release of months of held pain. Outside the courtroom, Emma waited, small and very still, staring at the doors. Every second felt endless, like waiting for a verdict on her own existence. Finally, the doors opened. Lara stepped out. The moment Emma saw her mother, she didn't run, she flew. Her small arms wrapped around Lara's waist with a force that seemed impossible for her size. Lara collapsed to her knees, holding her daughter as if she could anchor herself to the world through that tiny embrace alone. Emma pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, repeating again and again, in a voice breaking with relief, "You're here, you're here, you're here." Daniel stood a few steps away, watching quietly. He did not interrupt. He did not approach. He simply stood guard over a moment that belonged only to them. And though Emma did not look back at him, she somehow knew he was still there. He had said he would come back for her. And he did. When the courthouse steps began to empty and the crowds dissolved into the flow of the city, the weight of reality settled back onto Lara's shoulders. Freedom did not erase exhaustion. Relief did not erase the question of where to go next. She held Emma's hand tightly, afraid that if she loosened her grip, the world might take her daughter away again. Emma stayed close, pressing her cheek against Lara's sleeve, as if she believed her mother might fade if she didn't stay touching her. The courthouse behind them stood tall and silent, and the city around them moved without noticing them at all. They had no home now. Their old apartment had been sold long before the trial. There were no relatives to call, no neighbors who would take them in. Emma knew it, even if Lara hadn't spoken it aloud. She could tell by the way her mother looked at the street as though it had become endless. Emma's hand trembled, not from fear exactly, but from uncertainty so deep it felt like falling. Daniel stepped toward them, but he did not try to insert himself into their reunion. He waited until Lara finally lifted her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at him with gratitude, confusion, and a quiet kind of pride that refused to beg. She had lost so much, but she would not lose her dignity. Daniel admired that more than she could understand. "Thank you," Lara said. Her voice was soft and raw. "I don't know how to repay." "You don't have to repay anything right now," he interrupted gently. His tone was steady, not dismissive. "You need rest. Both of you." Lara hesitated. Her gaze flicked to Emma, who was watching them with an expression that seemed too old for her small face. "We'll manage," Lara said automatically, the kind of sentence people say when they have no idea how they will manage at all. Daniel studied her, not with pity, but with a clear understanding of the walls she was trying so hard to keep standing. Then he spoke plainly, his voice calm but sincere. "You don't have anywhere to go tonight." The statement wasn't a question. It was simply the truth placed gently on the table between them. Lara's shoulders lowered, the last of her resistance cracking under the weight of exhaustion. She didn't confirm it with words. She didn't need to. Daniel continued, "I have a guest house on my property. It's quiet, fully furnished, and safe." He said it as though offering a cup of tea, not a lifeline. "Stay there. Just until you get your footing." Lara shook her head once, instinctively recoiling from the idea of charity. "I don't want to take advantage." "You're not," Daniel said. "I'm offering this because your daughter deserves to sleep somewhere warm tonight. And because you do, too." Emma looked up at her mother then, her eyes wide and shining with hope she was afraid to voice. "Please," she whispered, only to Laura, not to Daniel. That single word made the decision. Laura closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. Softly, carefully, as if the movement itself might break something. "Thank you," she said again, but this time her voice shook in a way that held truth rather than defense. The drive to Daniel's home was quiet. Emma sat in the back seat, her small hand gripping her mother's fingers the entire ride. She watched the world blur past the window, but she did not cry anymore. She didn't smile either. She was simply holding on. When they pulled into the long driveway, the house rose ahead of them, not a mansion designed to impress, but a beautifully built home surrounded by trees and warm light glowing from inside. It looked like a place where people laughed in kitchens and sat on couches wrapped in blankets. A home made to be lived in, not displayed. Daniel led them around to the guest house, separate but close, with a porch and soft lamps that cast golden halos in the darkening evening. Inside, everything was clean, warm, and quiet. There were blankets folded neatly on the bed, children's books lined on a shelf, and a small window looking out into the garden. Laura stood in the doorway, her hand covering her mouth, because sometimes kindness is heavier than cruelty. Emma walked in slowly, as if afraid the room would disappear if she moved too quickly. She touched the bedspread with her fingertips, testing the softness, then sat down. The mattress didn't squeak. It didn't smell of strangers. It was simply safe. For the first time in so long, Emma's body loosened. Daniel didn't ask them anything more. He didn't linger in the doorway waiting for gratitude. He simply stepped back toward the door, giving them space. "Rest," he said. "We'll talk in the morning." Laura swallowed hard. "Daniel, why are you doing this?" He paused. For a moment, the quiet shifted into something deeper. "Because once," he said, eyes lowering just slightly, "someone didn't come for me." And then he left them to their peace. Inside the small guest house, Emma climbed into the bed and curled into her mother's side. The silence was warm now, not empty. The world no longer felt so sharp. As Emma drifted to sleep, she whispered, barely conscious, "We're not alone anymore." Laura held her tighter, her own tears silent, running into her daughter's hair. And outside, for the first time in a long time, the night felt gentle. Emma woke before the sun. The room was unfamiliar, yet soft and quiet in a way that made her feel she did not have to tense her body the way she always did in new places. She blinked slowly, noticing the warmth of her mother's arm draped around her. For a moment she lay still, listening. No distant arguing. No ambulance sirens outside the window. No rattling pipes. Just silence, deep and gentle. She sat up carefully so as not to wake Laura and looked around the small house again. The curtains were drawn, but light crept in along the edges, soft and golden. It smelled faintly of laundry soap and something sweet, like cinnamon. She breathed it in, holding it as long as she could. Laura woke with a start, eyes anxious, as if she had been dreaming of running. She looked around and her expression shifted slowly, like someone emerging from underwater. When her gaze landed on Emma, she exhaled and pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. It was not dramatic or desperate, just instinctive. For a few long seconds, they stayed that way, mother and child wrapped around each other in a world that had not yet hurt them today. There was a knock on the door. Soft. Not intrusive. The kind that said, "I am here if you want me to be." Laura stood quickly, smoothing her hair and sleeves, as if bracing for something formal. But when she opened the door, she found not officials or officers, but Daniel holding a basket. Bread still warm inside, steam rising in faint wisps. 2 cups of tea rested on a tray beside it. He didn't step inside, He simply offered the basket with the quiet ease of someone who knew how to give without demanding anything in return. "I thought breakfast might make the morning a little easier," he said. His tone was gentle, not pitying. Laura hesitated only a heartbeat before accepting. "Thank you," she said. She tried to stand straight, to hold herself with dignity, but her voice betrayed how thin her walls had become. Daniel nodded and stepped back. "If it's all right," he continued, "I'd like to speak with you after you've eaten. About work. And about getting you settled." Laura blinked. The word work had once meant exhaustion, humiliation, the ache of a body stretched too thin. Hearing it spoken without weight felt strange. She nodded. "Yes. Of course." He smiled faintly at Emma, who stood half behind her mother, studying him like a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. Daniel didn't push for kindness or conversation. He simply inclined his head and walked back toward the main house, giving them the space to breathe. Breakfast was quiet, but it was a kind of quiet that didn't hurt. They ate bread and fruit and warm tea, and Emma kept looking at her mother as if checking to make sure she was really there, really safe. Laura would catch her eyes and smile, tired but real. Afterward, Emma wandered to the window. The garden outside was large and calm, lined with trees whose leaves fluttered lightly in the breeze. A small stone path wound through it, disappearing around a corner. She watched birds hop across the grass and felt a strange sensation bloom in her chest, something like curiosity, something like wanting. Meanwhile, Laura sat with Daniel on the porch steps. He spoke plainly, without embellishment. He explained how she could start part-time work at his company as an office coordinator, sorting schedules, managing paperwork, answering calls. Not cleaning floors. Not hiding in back rooms. A job with a desk and a chair and a name tag. A job of dignity. Laura listened carefully, waiting for the hidden condition, the unspoken price. But none came. Daniel made sure she understood she was not being handed charity. She would be working, earning, building a future. He would assist with housing and transportation until she was able to stand on her own, but the goal was independence. Not dependence. Laura felt tears form in her eyes, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she hadn't realized how deeply she had missed being respected. Emma eventually stepped onto the porch, walking slowly toward them. She sat beside her mother, her legs swinging just above the ground. She looked up at Daniel, studying him. "Will we have to leave soon?" she asked, voice small, steady, prepared for disappointment. Daniel met her gaze with steady clarity. "Not until you're ready," he said. Emma considered this. Really considered. Then she nodded once, as if accepting a contract written in air. She leaned against her mother, resting her head on Lara's arm. The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang faintly. Life was still difficult. Nothing about their situation was simple. But something had shifted in the quiet between them. There was room now, for rest, for rebuilding, for breath. Not everything had to break. And for the first time in a long time, the day did not feel like something to endure. It felt like something that might lead somewhere. Emma began to adjust to the new place slowly, cautiously, like a frightened bird testing whether the branch would hold. The guest house felt safe, but safety was something she had never learned to trust easily. At first she moved through the rooms quietly, almost silently, as if afraid that making too much noise would somehow revoke her right to be there. She tiptoed even on carpet, opened drawers softly, and always checked that her mother was close enough to touch. The world had taught her that good moments were brief and fragile, easily broken. So she held everything carefully. Laura adjusted too, though in a different way. Her exhaustion was not something that disappeared with one night of rest. Her body needed time to slow down from years of constant survival mode. The first week, she slept heavily and often, the kind of sleep that came not from peace but from collapse. But every morning she woke and found Emma safe in the bed beside her, and each morning that realization eased something inside her that had been clenched for years. Daniel did not intrude. He visited only when necessary, and when he did, his presence was steady, never overwhelming. He helped Lara fill out forms for employment, guided her through orientation at his company, introduced her to the team calmly, without spectacle. He made sure she was treated not as charity but as an employee worthy of respect. The office staff received her kindly, partly because of Daniel's influence but mostly because Lara held herself with quiet resilience. She listened carefully, worked diligently, and spoke honestly. Even when she was nervous, she did not pretend. People respected that. Meanwhile, Emma explored the garden more each day. It became her world. She walked the stone pathways as though they were roads leading to secret kingdoms. She collected smooth pebbles and arranged them into little circles near the trees. She watched squirrels chase each other in spirals and birds hop along the fence. She didn't run or laugh loudly yet, but she observed everything with a growing curiosity, as if learning how to live in a place where she wasn't afraid. Daniel sometimes watched from the main house window, not approaching, just noticing. He saw the way Emma paused before entering each new space, the way she held her breath when startled, the way she always looked for her mother first before looking at the world. Trauma had settled into her posture, into the smallness of how she moved. But bit by bit, that began to shift. One afternoon, while Lara was at work and Emma sat outside drawing with chalk on the stone path, Daniel walked outside to check the mailbox. Emma didn't look up right away, absorbed in her careful lines. When she finally noticed him nearby, she froze, not in fear, but in the way children freeze when they are unsure what is expected of them. Daniel didn't speak immediately. He crouched down a short distance away, not approaching too close, giving her space. He watched the drawing take shape, a house with a window, two figures holding hands, and sun above them. It was simple, but it was something more than that, it was a wish she had allowed herself to put into the world. "That's very beautiful," he said quietly. Emma didn't answer at first. She drew another line, then placed the chalk down gently. "I drew it because..." She stopped, searching for the words. "Because I don't want to forget. The good things." Daniel nodded slowly, his voice gentle. "Good things should be remembered." Emma looked at him then, really looked, as if measuring him against something invisible. "But sometimes good things go away." Daniel did not rush a response. He let the silence settle, the breeze rustling the leaves above them. "That's true," he said finally. "Sometimes they do." He paused before continuing. "But sometimes good things stay. They stay longer than people expect. They stay even when the past didn't." Emma's eyes flickered, uncertain but curious. She seemed to test the idea in her mind, like touching something fragile to see if it would break. "Do you think this will stay?" she asked softly. Daniel didn't answer with promises. He didn't tell her everything would be perfect forever. He simply said, with quiet certainty, "I want it to." The wind moved lightly across the garden, carrying the scent of earth and leaves. Emma picked up a new piece of chalk and began to draw a third figure next to the first two. She didn't explain who it was. She didn't need to. Later that evening, when Lara returned from work, she found Emma asleep on the couch, arms wrapped around a small pillow, breathing softly and evenly. For the first time in a long time, her sleep looked peaceful. No nightmares. No trembling. Just rest. Lara brushed Emma's hair back, her eyes filling with tears, soft, grateful ones this time, not the desperate kind. Daniel stood at the doorway, watching mother and daughter reunited with something like quiet reverence. He didn't step closer. He didn't speak. He simply remained there, steady, present, a figure of calm in the doorway. Emma was learning how to live in safety. Lara was learning how to trust the world again. And Daniel was learning how to let something into his life that was not success, not responsibility, not duty, but connection. The kind that changes everything without asking permission. As autumn settled in, the days grew cooler, and Emma began school again. It was a new school with bright hallways and clean desks, and children who had never seen her cry on courthouse steps or heard rumors whispered about her family. Yet even in this fresh place, Emma carried her old instincts with her. She sat at the edge of groups rather than inside them. She raised her hand only when she was absolutely sure of the answer. She watched before she spoke. Children can be gentle or careless without meaning harm, and Emma had learned to expect the careless before the kind. On the first day, when the class lined up for lunch, Emma stood toward the back. The cafeteria was warm and loud, filled with the clatter of trays and bursts of laughter. When she reached the counter, she looked at the food, sandwiches, fruit, cartons of milk, and froze. Her hands began to tighten into fists. She remembered too vividly the weeks when her mother skipped meals so Emma could eat, the way food had become something uncertain, something that felt like asking for too much. She shook her head when the cafeteria worker smiled and placed a tray in front of her. "I'm not hungry," Emma said, voice small. But she was hungry. The kind of hunger that sits quietly in your stomach because you've trained yourself not to complain. She walked to a table and sat alone, hands folded neatly on the empty surface. Across the cafeteria, Daniel's son, Ethan, had been watching. Ethan was 11, old enough to recognize when someone was trying not to be seen. He had heard pieces of the story, only the soft version his father believed a child should hear. He knew Emma had come from something hard. He did not know the details, but he didn't need them. He took his own tray, sandwich, apple slices, and a small chocolate milk, and walked over to her table. He sat down across from her without asking, without an introduction, without a reason beyond the simple fact that no one should eat lunch alone. Emma didn't look up. She stared at the table. After a long moment, Ethan slid his tray a little closer to her. "You can have mine," he said. Emma's shoulders stiffened. "I can't. I'm fine." Ethan shook his head. "I saw your face when you looked at the food. You're hungry." Emma didn't argue. She simply lowered her eyes. "I can't pay you back." Ethan shrugged. "I didn't ask you to." He pushed the tray again. "Just eat with me." Emma hesitated, then picked up a piece of apple. Her hands trembled a little, not from hunger but from the vulnerability of accepting something. They ate in silence at first. But silence between children can be comfortable when neither of them wants anything except to share space. After a while, Ethan leaned his chin on his hand. "My mom died when I was 4, he said. He didn't say it dramatically. It was just a truth he had learned to live with. It was just me and my dad for a long time." Emma looked up now, finally meeting his eyes. "Is it lonely?" she whispered. "Sometimes," Ethan answered. "But it's better now. Because you're here. And you're kind of quiet like me. Quiet people make good friends." Emma blinked, unsure what to do with a sentence like that. She studied him, his brown hair, his calm blue eyes, his steady posture. Then something in her chest loosened. She nodded. "Okay." They didn't say friends, but they didn't need to. When school ended, Daniel waited outside. He stood tall beside the gate, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. He had rushed from a meeting to make sure he was there on time, not because Emma needed to be picked up, but because he had begun to understand that showing up was everything. Emma walked out with Ethan beside her. She smiled, small and cautious, but real. It was the first time Daniel had seen her smile like that, not out of politeness or gratitude, but from something warm inside herself. He felt something shift inside him again, something quiet and deep. On the drive home, Emma told them about the garden she wanted to grow at school, flowers and herbs and maybe even vegetables. She spoke with careful excitement, as if afraid her voice might break the dream. Daniel listened, not just hearing, but understanding what it meant. She trusted enough to hope. Later that night, when Emma and Lara sat together reading, Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment. He watched them, mother and daughter nestled into each other, lamplight soft around them. Emma leaned against Lara's shoulder without fear of being taken. Lara rested her cheek against Emma's hair without fear of losing her. Everything that had once been trembling and uncertain was slowly learning to become still. Daniel turned and walked quietly down the hall, letting the soft sound of their voices follow him. Some families are born. Others are built, slowly, gently, with patience. Brick by brick. Moment by moment. And sometimes, simply by choosing to stay. Winter came softly, blanketing the city in quiet white mornings and early evenings. The guest house windows frosted on the edges, and Emma began waking to the gentle hush of falling snow. By now, her steps in the house were louder, her presence no longer cautious or hesitant. She hummed while brushing her hair. She laughed sometimes, small but unforced. She no longer checked every room before allowing herself to relax. Her eyes, once full of constant watchfulness, now carried something new, light. Lara changed too. Her shoulders no longer curved inward as if shielding herself from the world. She had grown steadier at work, more confident, and the other employees noticed the way she listened with attention and worked with care. When she walked home at the end of each day, she did so with purpose, not dread. The weight she once carried had not disappeared entirely, it had simply been shared, softened, supported. Daniel saw all of this. He did not take credit or speak of what he had done. Instead, he invited them into his life gradually, naturally. Some evenings, Emma and Lara shared dinner at the main house, eating at a long table that no longer felt too large. Emma helped set the plates, Ethan told terrible jokes, and Lara sometimes laughed so suddenly and fully that she startled herself. Other nights, they stayed in the guest house, warm behind drawn curtains, and that was right too. Daniel had learned not to hold too tightly. Safety was something offered, not imposed. One evening, weeks before Christmas, snowflakes drifted slowly outside, swirling under the soft golden light of the porch lamps. Emma sat at the kitchen table, coloring in a notebook, while Lara filled out some final documents for her official full-time employment at Daniel's company. Daniel sat across from her, explaining a few details. His tone was calm, clear, respectful. Lara listened, nodded, signed. It was simple, but it symbolized something far greater. She was no longer surviving from day to day. She was building something, steady, lasting, hers. When she finished, she looked up. For the first time, she met Daniel's eyes without fear, debt, or hesitation. Just truth. "Thank you," she said quietly, but her voice was strong this time, grounded. Not gratitude born from desperation. Gratitude born from understanding. Daniel's expression softened. "You did this," he answered. "I helped. But you did it." She held his gaze a moment longer, and there was something unspoken between them, not a promise, not an obligation, but the beginning of something possible. In the living room, Emma was now drawing something new. She called both of them over to see. On the page was a small house with warm yellow windows. In front of it stood 3 figures holding hands, a woman, a child, and a man. Snow fell around them in gentle white dots. Lara's breath caught. Her hand came to her mouth. Emma looked at the drawing, then at them, her voice small but sure. "I don't want to leave anymore," she said. "This feels like home." The room fell quiet. Not heavy, peaceful. Daniel knelt beside her. He didn't touch her yet, didn't crowd her or take ownership of the moment. He simply asked, with genuine gentleness, "Emma, would it be all right if we made this official one day? All of us. Together." Emma nodded once, with all the solemn certainty of a child who has learned the true value of trust. Lara's eyes filled with tears, not the painful kind that burn, but the kind that release something held for too long. She placed her hand on Daniel's shoulder, steady and calm. No one said, "family." They didn't need to. In the months that followed, papers would be signed, rooms rearranged, holidays shared, and memories built. There would be challenges, moments of fear, moments of healing, moments where the past tried to return. But they would meet those moments together now, not alone. For now, the three of them sat together in the warm light of the kitchen, snow falling silently outside, a little girl leaning her head against her mother's arm, a man sitting close with his palms resting open, offering presence instead of pressure. Outside, winter held the world still. Inside, something new was beginning. Not dramatic. Not rushed. Just real. A family, chosen, steady, and lasting, forming quietly, like dawn.